making sure you're drawing cards efficiently. One thing I will say is Fr0zen, from what we've seen not only this season so far, but also a previous season, previous iterations of OTK Demon Hunter, is the best, and I can say this hands down, is the best OTK Demon Hunter player in America's Grandmasters. And that's just, I can say that because that's what I watched the majority of, right, is America's Grandmasters. He could even be one of the best OTK Demon Hunter players in the world. Every single game that I watch him play, I learn something new, which is not always the case when we watch Grandmasters, especially America's Grandmasters play decks.
Oh yeah, by proxy, if you're the best player in America, you're the best player in the world. So I completely believe it.
Bingo.
So Fr0zen,
yeah.
#1 OTK combo Demon Hunter player, and I believe it. Fr0zen, when the deck first started even rising in prominence, not even just from this rotation, but previous expansions heading into the Year of the Griffin, Fr0zen was streaming this deck like 10 to 12 hours a day. He would stream like 4 to 6 hours in English and then stream 4 to 6 hours in Chinese on different sites. I mean, he was obsessed with this deck, and he was really sad to see it get nerfed in certain capacities, but it's very much alive. And so we're going to start things off here with Nalguidan trying to build some pressure, very reasonable, but it's like you said, he has cards in his deck to help deal with other variants of aggression, but he doesn't really have much to deal with, or rather much tempo to build early on to try and pressure his opponent. Look at it, he's swinging with an Eldrazi Warblaze on 3 just to apply as much pressure as possible. I'm even anticipating him throwing out a Shard Shatter Mystic to try and get as much damage squeeze as possible to pressure Fr0zen here.
Yeah, this matchup can, it's so weird because they're both operating on their own game plan, and they're not really interacting with each other's boards because they're not really building boards, right? I said Soul Demon Hunter can build some boards, but it's really small meaning. It's the biggest meaning they have is the Soul Shard Lapidary. It's about acquiring the burst, right, and putting on as much pressure as you can. There is, as we see, an Acidic Swamp Ooze in the deck from Fr0zen, and just gets it out right away. There's no guarantee that there's going to be Marl Slicer. There's also, with OTK Demon Hunter, you're always in this position where if you can play a card, you probably want to, just because it's going to make it that much easier to try and craft your hand to a point where you can get Skull of Gul'dan in the outcast position, which is basically how the deck functions. Is you need to be able to draw those cards, and a lot of times you need to get the discount.
Yes, absolutely. Mana efficiency, card draw, making sure that the board control is good, is reasonable, right? You don't necessarily have to freak out if your opponent has a couple minions on the board, but you have to ensure that you're not taking too much damage. Because the one thing that the Soul Demon Hunter does really well, and why people still play variants of this archetype even without the soul package, is because the amount of frightening burst damage that can come out of nowhere. He doesn't have the Soul Shard Lapidary queued up because he doesn't have the soul fragments, considering that he just consumed one, but it's okay. He just drew the Marrow Slicer, continue to pressure. And then as you see the game develop, one thing that's going to be an interesting dynamic is, does Nalguidan even bother to play minions? Because he's giving targets for Fr0zen to utilize his lifesteal on if he doesn't necessarily have the full combo pieces himself. And so this kind of dynamic, this little song and dance is going to be quite interesting to watch as we go through. Fr0zen with some very quick picks here. Jamming tempo onto the board here, finds another opportunity to discover one of these cards to shuffle back into his opponent's deck. And I'm pretty sure he's thinking about ways to reduce the amount of pressure through the Soul Shard Lapidary, although I'm wondering if he's thinking about something else, like just the raw damage that can come out from his opponent here.
Yeah, I think Fr0zen could have saved Illidari Studies until turn 6, which is in a lot of matchups when you want to save it for, because then if you hit Skull, it's already in the outcast position. I think what Fr0zen may have been looking for Star Student Stelina to actually play to shuffle Skull back into Nalguidan's deck. I think that's what the goal of this play was. And then if he hits card draw, cool, but interrupting an opportunity for turn 6 to hit Skull, which he would have, to try and disrupt Nalguidan's potential to draw cards if he had Skull in hand. Yes. So I like the mindset from Fr0zen here, because he actually does have Moarg plus I-Beam on the left-hand side, which it's very likely he's going to hit a minion, and that's probably why he didn't get rid of the Soul Shard Lapidary, because he wants an excuse to dump Moarg I-Beam to get Skull into outcast position. I like a lot about that turn from Fr0zen. I think that was quite clean.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way to analyze the perspective from Fr0zen, which is if I can stall my opponent's game plan out, he eventually will gas out, and I have more resources, which will naturally lead to, this combo anyways, right? The thing about OTK Demon Hunter is that you have so many ways to get to a one-turn kill, 30 damage now, that you don't necessarily have to play as conservative as you used to in previous iterations. And now Fr0zen is just going to go ahead and set up this Skull of Gul'dan. He actually knows exactly the 2 cards remaining in Nalguidan's hand. And, Nalguidan still has to deal with things like this Moarg, for example. It's not something that you want to leave on the board for too long.
Yeah, and it's also not the most fun minion to trade a lot of damage into. You know that you have to in a lot of circumstances, like in this case, but it also means that that's a ton of damage that's not hitting face, right? Which is a big deal since Nalguidan's running low on resource. He's going to need Skull. He's not in range of any type of Illidari Inquisitor breakpoints yet. Even if he draws like Fury, Illidari Inquisitor, it's still going to be tough. And Fr0zen hits some great combo pieces. He's already getting close to finishing that combo. He has 12 cards left in his deck. He's like a talented Arcanist, almost a talented Arcanist away from just getting there with both Raging Fellscreamer and Il'gynoth. I guess a Moarg too, since Nalguidan's still at a pretty high life total.
And just look at the life rebound. Nalguidan picks up Skull of Gul'dan off the top. You can see Fr0zen disappointed, but that is what Demon Hunter's secondary effect of Outcast. People think all the time about sliding cards to the left, but sometimes that top deck is exactly what you need. Nalguidan able to continue to churn out his card draw resources. Mana Feeder Panthera able to help pick up the Il'gynoth, which, something we didn't necessarily discuss too much is that Nalguidan has his own combos. What is going on?
Oh my gosh, it's sick.
Okay. So finds more cheap card draw in the form of Acrobatics, although hand management is something to consider. And he does have so many cheap cards, including the discounted Il'gynoth for himself, that Fr0zen could probably start thinking about how to set this up. The one thing that's missing is that he does not actually have a Moarg Artificer. Oh, okay. And now that he has the Philosophy, he should be in a good position to finish this game, even as soon as next turn.
Yeah, so he'll get a double Moarg from the Philosophy and be able to play that for 3 mana, 4 mana, 5 mana. He has plenty of mana to do it all. So if we count damage, it'll double it once, so that'll be 2, it'll double again, that'll be 4, so that's 12 damage from the first Fellscream Blast, and then at least 4 from the second one, so that's 16. If Nalguidan plays another minion, or 2 other minions, that could go up, and then 4 from the weapon swing, so it would be... If he has 2 minions, it'd be 20, 24. So if Nalguidan plays 1 other minion, I believe it is lethal with just what's in hand. Otherwise, it's slightly off. Well, if Acidic Swampooze comes out, it's no longer lethal because he doesn't have the lifesteal weapon anymore. But there is 2 talented Arcanists.
Right. One being used.
Take a look. Yeah, 2 talented Arcanists. Blood Mage Thalnos as well. I believe both of those would be enough for lethal. And he's got plenty of mana to spare because all of these combo pieces are cheap and has the Raging Fellscreamer to reduce their cost. Yep, there it is. That's lethal.
Yeah. So just needed 1 to really do the trick. As you can see, this combination, if it's your first time looking, it's going to be a fast one. Fr0zen going to drop the Il'gynoth, the Moarg that got copied. It's all free. Get the spell power. It doubles. Wait, it quadruples. He has 2 Fellscream Blasts. It is very much over. And there's not much that Nalguidan to do except, try to pressure as much as he could. So given the tools at his disposal, pretty much a straightforward game from both sides. No real big mistakes. But goes to show you about how scary a flawlessly played OTK Demon Hunter deck can be. And and why so many players, they struggle when they go up against this deck, because you feel so powerless sometimes because you have to try to disrupt them. What can you do? Discover a glide of some kind? Like, is that the best thing that you can do? It's just really rare to find those kinds of scenarios to disrupt your opponent. So, good job for Fr0zen, but it was a pretty straightforward game from about turn 5 or 6 onward.
Yeah, it was just about finding those combo pieces, and the second skull picked up off the top for Fr0zen was the nail in the coffin for Nalguidan. And, OTK Demon Hunter, through 2 weeks of play now, is the highest win rate deck, I believe, across all 3 regions of Grandmasters, with anywhere close to a significant sample size. And that even goes up when you have players like Fr0zen who are consistently playing the deck at a very high level. There are not many decks that can challenge it. The biggest one is probably Priest, with the opportunity for Mind Render or Lucia, or just, really fast aggro decks. Token Druid is a good one because they have very resilient boards against the clear and can get off to quick starts. And Face Hunter is another one, though Face Hunter does give the OTK Demon Hunter a chance to interrupt their combo and just play for, big Moarg tempo and lifesteal. Not as potent anymore, because we're going to get a chance to look at the Face Hunter. Face Hunter now has a lot more staying power than it has in the past. In the past, Face Hunter was all about emptying your hand, whittling down with the hero power, and consistently dumping damage, where now it has that aspect as well, but also has big mid-range power in the form of Warsong Wrangler into Trampling Rhino, the Barrack Kotobane, pulling out the Angry Mankrik, and just, bigger bodies of stuff, and a better ability to fight back on board while dealing damage, which I think is kind of the key in what makes Face Hunter such a potent deck in the metagame currently.
Yeah, when you think about the arc of Face Hunter from, classic Hearthstone having been released since we last casted Grandmasters together, TJ, and you get to see a little bit of a throwback of how resources were managed back then. The resource generation for Face Hunter was extra charges on your Ego Horn bow. That was pretty much it. and then there was the quest, right, which would power your hero power throughout the times, and you had other ways to get cards, like the Unleash the Hounds and the Starving Buzzard. But now we get to the point where Face Hunter has a lot of staying power because of the discovers and the ability to draw cards from your deck very consistently, to the point where they don't even really need tracking nearly as much as they did before. On the other hand, speaking of resource generation, Fr0zen playing the Miracle Rogue. He is playing the Alex Straza and the Tenmu, the Red Smoke combination, giving him some combo damage late. But chances are in this matchup, it's not going to come down to a combo like that. Instead, he's going to try to just survive and make sure he doesn't lose board too quickly. But there's one thing that I've been seeing about this Rogue deck is that it is very popular and its win rate is not that high, DJ. In fact, if you go across the publicly available data sites, the higher rank you go, the higher the win rate of this deck climbs. So I think it's in the hands of the pilot, and you love to see that, because Rogue players, they're a little bit of a masochist. They love more challenging decks because the more complicated they are, they feel like they have more high skill expression ceilings.
Yeah, it is a deck that you really need to be playing on point, because it does have very little reach, right? At least in that mid game, when you're talking about going up against a deck like Face Hunter, where it's essentially a race. You need to have fast openings, good amount of board clear, brain freezes, prize plunders early on to keep control of the board, and then finish the game with burst damage before the hunter is able to hit the critical massive damage themselves. And they're basically limited to the wicked stabs right now, because they really don't have that big board generation, the questing adventures, the Edwins that can end games super quick anymore. They're relying on a bunch of small things that swarm and then wicked stabs to finish. So it is about managing your resources to the best of your ability now, instead of just trying to look for those massive questing Edwin boards like Rogue had in the past, when you're talking about going up against an aggressive deck and trying to maximize your win rate.
Yeah, especially with the nerfs coming in recently. You can see one of them, Jandis Barov, being 6 mana. And I'm sure you've heard it a lot across other casts. They've been talking about the nerfs a lot. Penflinger, for example, only able to target minions. It's completely different now. Rogue doesn't really have that ability to weave in those 1 damage death by 1,000 paper cuts. Instead, they really prioritize comboing that burst damage together But do they need it this early on? I think this kind of hand from Fr0zen is one that can easily get away from him. I'd rather favor more stable early game cards in order for him to ensure that he's able to fight back for the board. So I like the Plies Plunderer. He does end up keeping the Jandis, though. Okay, so that's very expensive. That's the most expensive card outside of Alex. And Nalguidan, of course, picked up the 1-drop, which I'm sure Fr0zen isn't really happy to see. What do we think about this mulligan here from Fr0zen's perspective? You know, keeping Jandis, a really expensive card, against a pretty quick deck.
So it's got to be because of just the high roll potential, right? The pool of 5-drops right now is actually pretty insane. That's why Jandis is still playable at 6 mana. If we had a previous pool of 5-mana minions, like say before the expansion and the core set going away in rotation, Jandis probably wouldn't really be playable at 6 mana. It'd be too much reliability. There were too many not so great 5-drops. But now you have a ton of good ones. The average attack went up. The average health went up. There's big taunts. There's disruption. So I think that Fr0zen's saying this is a tough matchup. And Jandis gives me this ability to have this big burst of power into the board that can swing the game, and that's maybe what he thinks he needs. He actually picks up Efficient Autobot, which is honestly pretty insane. He might be worried about Adorable Infestation, but I feel like that would have come out last turn, and so I think he can freely play this, get the discount, and then Jandis back to 5 mana again, can come on turn 4 with the coin. There you go.
Yeah, you know, that was the only concern on my end, right? Which is there's so much that can happen between when Fr0zen can play Jandis versus not, that it feels like a lot of times, if you're not careful, the game could feel like it's already decided by the time Jandis comes out, and then you're hoping for a taunt, and you're hoping for a high-impact minion, which chances are you should be able to get. But that being said, you know, the Efficient Octobot, discounting your hand by 1 across the board, fantastic for exactly what Fr0zen wants to do. And now with this Prize Plunder and Shadow Step, he can effectively destroy this entire board. And the momentum from Nalguidan has completely been stalled. As you see, the triple well played coming out from Nalguidan. And that is really bad news for Nalguidan, as you know, this field contact can continue to draw cards. Really powerful engine for Rogue to keep it going. Is it worth Fr0zen expending additional resources like the Shadow Step or even the coin in order to capitalize onto it and potentially even keep it alive, right? Because he knows that there's a chance that the field contact might not get challenged if he's able to kill off, say, another 1/1.
I don't know if it's worth it, because next turn he wants to coin Jandis, so he doesn't want to use the coin this turn for like Brain Freeze, for example. And Shadow Step again can be used on Jandis, so he goes coin Jandis on 5, Shadow Steps it, and then Jandis plus Brain Freeze to clean up stuff on the board on 5, so it'll be turn 4, turn 5. It's whether or not, the question for him was whether or not he wanted to pigeonhole himself into 1, shadow stepping Jandis, and then 2, having to play Jandis on 5, maybe not flexible if the board gets away from him, or he doesn't get a good Jandis to begin with and doesn't want to take that 2-1 off board. So decides to just take the cycle, get rid of the 2-1 on board, force Nalguidan to actually have damage from hand on 4 to deal with field contact by only leaving a 1-1 on the board. So I think the upside of all those things was too great for Fr0zen to pass up.
Agreed. And I like that Fr0zen was considering that. And, you know, I think a lot of times, especially as rogue players, you get enamored by the combos on your side, but you have to remember that there's another side of the player, there's another player on the other side of the board that you have to be mindful of. Jandis comes out, finds finds a card that might appear on the other side in Barak Kodobane, as well as his Soldier Lapidary. A little bit of a mind game here, setting up the opportunity for Soldier Lapidary to be the one that would die if it gets traded into. But now Nalguidan's going to start things off with what the second charge of Ridling's Rifle is able to find here.
Yeah, I think this is specific, one, because there's a 1-1 on board and Fr0zen wants to make it awkward for Nalguidan to make a decision, but also in case of Tundra Rhino. Apologies, because I actually don't remember the interaction, but I'm pretty sure if you Tundra Rhino an Illusion minion, it still deals extra damage, even if you're only dealing that amount of damage to it. No, that's got to be wrong. Never mind. I don't think that's how it works. But that'd be another reason to do it. But I think he just doesn't want to give Nalguidan an easy trade over this 1-1. Nalguidan's just going to say, I'm not going to even try to make the choice. I'm just going to push face damage. He also has, I believe, the 2 secrets are Pack Tactics and Explosive Trap. So
Pack Tactics!
Pack Tactics! Making it a little awkward for Fr0zen here, because whether he decides to go face, lose a lot of power, or trade off these minions and have to give up a lot of power just trading on board, both of those are pretty rough situations for Fr0zen to be in.
Yeah, very much so. And now Fr0zen just has to make sure that he can keep his momentum up as long as he can continue to use the secrets. Looking at this efficient Octobot to start things off here.
Efficient is sufficient.
Now, the most important thing to consider from Fr0zen's perspective is, how much can he squeeze out of this secret passage, and can he find a way to fight back against Nalguidan while continuing to balance his resources? A lot of times in this situation where I feel like I am stuck in a position where Hunter actually out-resources me. So this is a really powerful turn coming up from Fr0zen. The Froxy Fod, the Swindle, the Wanty, Shadow Step, they're all playables. They all generate resources. They all help him get some tempo. And he can continue to chain it together by putting this Octobot again back in his hand. Wow, this is looking great so far for Fr0zen.
That is sick. That is a solid turn, I will say.
Yes. I mean, he doubled his hand count. He cleared the board. He developed his board 3 times over in terms of power. And not only that, he has some mysteriously generated cards, which are going to be hard for Nalguidan to play around, including secrets like Counterspell. So, Fr0zen's at a pretty healthy life total, so this is great. And now we're getting to that point where maybe he can put together a combo burst plan, right? He has Alexstrasza, he has Wicked Stab in hand, and if you put those together at max power, that's going to be pretty much the difference between Nalguidan's life total and what's on board. So he has to be mindful of that. That being said, it's not like Nalguidan doesn't have options himself. In fact, every single card in his hand is a piece of or damage source directly to Fr0zen. The question is, how does he best layer it without losing the board state, right? Like he could use Trampling Rhino, for example, to immediately kill off this efficient Octobot, disable the ability for your opponent to get the maximum frenzy, but instead he's going to prioritize pushing the damage. I like it. Your Hunter, go face. 3 of your cards can continue to push out damage. Discount your hand all you want. I'm coming for your life total.
Yeah, and I think this is a necessary play because Nalguidan's hand does have some semblance of board control with both Piercing Shot and Trampling Rhino. And you have to risk giving up the Octobot activation because you need that 5 damage instead of 3 damage at this point, because you're limited on how many turns you have left, how many turns you have left until Fr0zen kills you, and he needs at least 2 more turns to be able to piece together that damage. So he needs to maximize damage and not worry so much about trying to disrupt Fr0zen's potential power plays. But giving that discount over is a big deal, especially with Alexstrasza in hand, because that heal could come in handy, and now it can come out as early as turn 8. But Fr0zen, I mean, this is kind of tough, because at this stage, drawing cards, cool, it has some merit, but he really just wants to try and present lethal over the next 2 turns to try and play around this damage, because he's going to take another. Let's see, if he Trampling Rhinos over the 2-1, there's still a decent amount of power on board, but not that much. He gets to Hero Power 2, so that'd be 8 damage, which would put Fr0zen down to 7, and then Piercing Shot plus Knife Vendor. Knife Vendor would bring him down to 4. Piercing Shot just needs to hit a 2 health minion. So I honestly think that's the play. He leaves 9 damage on board. Dagger would be 10. 1 Wicked Stab wouldn't kill him. That might be his best chance to set up for a 2-turn lethal here is to... field contact. Okay.
Yeah, I think the idea that Fr0zen only needs another piece of damage on top of that Wicked Stab is too much. Second Wicked Stab comes into the hand. Let's count 3, 5, 7, 8, plus the extra 8. That's 16, Dagger 17. Fr0zen's going to close out game number 2. Tough spots from Nalguidan. He set up as best as he could. I actually really like the line that he set forth. It's one of those situations where it's do or die, and you have to hope that Rogue doesn't have those cards. But the chances of Rogue being able to do that and finish the job is pretty high, actually, given that, there's even the discovered mage card from the Wand Thief that Nalguidan wasn't really sure about. So there was a lot of ways for Fr0zen to have closed that gap and be able to win that race. And that's what makes Rogue still super scary. Yes, lackeys are out of rotation. You don't really have the ability to do these crazy combinations with 1-mana lackeys, but they still have some tricks up their sleeves, which makes them a threat at all points of the game.
Yeah, I do like the way Nalguidan played that one. I think he maximized his damage in places where he should have, and respected minions also in places where he should have, like the field contact on that last turn. It's just the power of efficient Octobot, of Jandis in those situations, not allowing Nalguidan to ever really have like full control of the board, which is something that Face Hunter does a lot more now than it has in the past. And Nalguidan was close. If he was given one more turn, Knife Bender plus Piercing Shot, if there was a one-held minion somewhere after this board was traded down, he might have been able to find a lethal spot. So very close, but now 2-0 up for Fr0zen. And keep in mind, he did 3-0 Impact yesterday. So if he manages to win his third game and have another 6-0 from Decider to quarterfinal, yeah, it's pretty good, but we're coming up on what I think is probably the weakest deck in this lineup. It might line up pretty well against Nalguidan's lineup as a whole. Aggressive decks where the healing and the big top from Void Drinker could come in handy, but I've lost a lot of faith in Control Warlock over the past couple weeks. Watching it being played against good players, it does have some glaring weaknesses that have become apparent. But as we said earlier, Fr0zen's bringing a very different version, a very creative version, much more board-centric version, where he's got Demonic Studies, Philosophy, he's got an Acidic Swampus in there, Void Drinkers. So it's not all in on just removing every single board possible. It can do that, but it also has some of that like mid-game minion pressure that can help fight for the board and not leave you sort of all in on hoping you find the removal each turn for whatever your opponent plays. You can actually find that board tension.
Game of 3 is upon us. Control Warlock versus the aggressive Hunter deck. It's a matchup that's actually been in Hearthstone for quite some time, and we'll see whether or not these modern versions of it will favor one side or other. Traditionally, the Hunter's been able to pressure and get those wins over the Warlock, and that's what leads to the stat imbalance. But also, I'm a firm believer that a lot of players are still learning how to maximize Control Warlock, even build it to what you were saying, right? Fr0zen has all these tech choices. So, is this going to be the game where Nalguidan's able to start building up hope? Because obviously a loss here means the series is over, but also just kind of show you the dominance that it was not Nalguidan's day, because the first two games really felt like Nalguidan's proactive game plan just got shut down and that he didn't really have much of a follow-up through. This is a matchup where nuance, timing, how you're pressuring, tempo, creating this value chain of resources as well, is going to be really important, because it's not simply about always pressuring and going face as much as you can. You have to really time yourself around Warlock's removal and what you think that they're showing you based off that information.
Yeah, it can be quite tough. This is Control Warlock has been the deck that I've, even in practice, have struggled with to win the most, because a lot of Hearthstone players make a big deal about Ticketus, but Ticketus is actually not the easiest thing to corrupt, right? You don't have that many 7+ cost cards in your deck, and Sociologist Militia is not always in the hand or not always worth it to play. And in other decks, you have this cool targeted removal in School Spirits, but sometimes you have like one or the other, and it may not line up against the board. You may need AoE but only have single target. You may need single target and only have AoE. So it's about finding that removal. So I kind of like what Fr0zen's done to kind of make up for that weakness. It definitely wanted face damage there.
Oh man, especially if he was looking for an opportunity to squeeze out things like Piercing Shot as his primary game plan. Does have a backup. Able to find the Refa off the Demon Companion. Can also layer in the Adorable Infestation to build the board. Like you talked about, has to be mindful of things like Hysteria, like School Spirits. Just make sure that he's not making himself too vulnerable to it. So gonna buff up instead his Felmaw. Do you like that?
I love it a lot. It plays around multiple things. It plays around Hysteria because now the Imprisoned Felmaw won't clear the board and die. It plays around both Drain Soul and Soul Shear for his biggest minion. Fr0zen doesn't end up having Siphon Soul, but has to spend coins, still leaves minions on board. So a very solid play from Nalguidan, I think. Sacrificing a damage, which a lot of players would have just cashed in on damage, to play around the most removal possible. To maximize output on the following turn. So nice little spot there from Nalguidan.
Nalguidan picking up his second copy of Trampling Rhino, buffing both of them in the hand. That Warsong Wrangler, a huge reason why the resources from Hunter seems to be very consistent, even all the way up to 10 mana. However, that being said, he's not going to fully extend into it. He really wants his opponent to play minions. But that's a really big one. Void Drinker, it's going to be a little bit tricky to take down very cleanly from Nalguidan. He would have to lose his Rhino for trading into it, but still can at least get past and push some damage. And that's the kind of consistent pressure that you're really looking for as the Hunter. It's not really about, putting things together in one 12 damage turn, but chipping away at the Warlock, forcing Fr0zen into awkward positions where he has to use removal suboptimally, picking up this Void Drinker number 2.
That is quite good. Quite good. Nalguidan did something pretty cool there. He held onto his 1/1 last turn to give himself some additional reach with Piercing Shot. Then once the Void Drinker was played, I think he realized that it also played into Hysteria the previous turn. It would have allowed it for a board clear because there would have been exactly 4 damage and 4 health on the Warsong Wrangler. Also had the added benefit of being a 1/1 in hand, so Piercing Shot is a guaranteed 5. This turn knew that it actually wasn't going to be the case that it would clear because you'd only have a 2/1 and a 1/1. So Nalguidan doing his best to play around removal, but Fr0zen is, dealing with board after board. It's just he's getting whittled away by hero power. So it needs to find kind of that definitive healing. Needs to find those Drain Souls, Soul Fragment generators to be able to have Soul Fragments so he can more comfortably life tap. Oh,
yeah.
Minari Mosher.
Finds the Minari Mosher, which is great. The lifesteal could be huge, especially if his minion survives. Ticketus coming down, removing his own cards, which don't really matter. He just values his tempo, and remember, he's trying to go for the lifesteal swing. And now Nalguidan has to figure out, does he want to deal with his Ticketus, which he can. He has a Trampling Rhino. He does have even ways to deal with it and get a little bit extra damage and push. Or does he commit to the damage plan with the fact that he played, Barack Kodama, slammed it, draw 2 cards. Now he gets more burn. How much does Nalguidan want to push in here?
How often do you think about Minari Mosher from Demonic Cities? That's the question. And I like what Fr0zen did. He played Ticketus, which is easier to ignore than Void Drinker. Void Drinker Nalguidan would have to kill, right? It could save him some potential life, but Void Drinker you have to kill because he needs to push through face damage, whereas Ticketus is much more inconspicuous. It's much more likely to stick because Nalguidan wants to remove it because he tastes all that face damage, right? That he can go through without the taunt. So if it does stick, Minari Mosher could even just end the game with how much lifesteal it would have. So I'm curious if Nalguidan is going to respect this 8/8. He does have some reach in hand. Oh, he did it. I can't blame him. him.
Yeah, considering that he had Trampling Rhino with the buff from the Warsong Wrangler, and the fact that he gets the +1 buff to all of his friendly minions. Oh my goodness, he's going to be able to do it twice. Not once, but the double. And now he's going to be able to restore 11 HP. And he's going to be able to kill off 3 minions from the Corrupted Cascading Disaster. And just like that, equalization, but is it really that equal? Fr0zen's board is so much stronger. Not to mention that Fr0zen has a second Minari Masher. And it's so brutal because it's exactly the situation we set up. Nalguidan had the ability to deal with it, but he would have to give up a lot of his resources. And he's aware of the range of Warlock, but he's not aware of the demon that was discovered. And that is the power of that card in this deck.
That is
brutal.
Just brutal. Yeah. And knows the second one is there. I mean, he's throwing damage to the face. What else can he do in that situation? Easy turn from Fr0zen here. He can afford to life tap if he wants to as well, but honestly, pushing another 11 this turn, lethal setup on board. I don't think Nalguidan even has anything in his deck that could kill both an 8/8 and a 4/5 in the same turn. That's a rough one from Nalguidan. That is brutal.
Yep. Does not look like Nalguidan had much in his power throughout this entire series, but the couple of moments he did, you can't really fault him for not playing around things like the Minari Mashur. Like, I mean, how many times do you see that, right? I'm sure people could run math and say, like, in this situation, maybe it's worth, but when you only have a little bit over a minute to make that call and your hand is telling you to play a certain way to pressure the Warlock in a matchup that's favorable, I mean, that's just brutal. So Nalguidan's going to go ahead and peek at the top 3 cards. Nothing can really save him. This Wolpentinger has not been buffed by the Warsong Wrangler. And, I mean, there's lethal on board that he needs to deal with. Otherwise, it is game over right here. So Nalguidan can survive at least for another turn. But, I mean, surviving is not winning at this stage of the game.
No, it is not. He can hope that Fr0zen's hand is just completely dead and, you know, maybe like... I don't know. That's his deck. Riddling Rifle, Piercing Shot. No quick shot, so he like can't even draw multiple cards a turn outside of Warsong Wrangler, which would only pick up the second Wolpertinger. It's just brutal game, and a brutal series for Nalguidan. But Fr0zen, a creative Warlock deck, not one that we see often, at least compared to the other control Warlock decks that are currently playing across all 3 regions in Grandmasters, but both days so far, I've seen his choices pay off time after time. So another fantastic series from Fr0zen earns himself a spot in the semifinals.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we talked about going to this game is that, from my perspective, and it's echoed by a few other people, is that we're not really sure what the optimal control Warlock list is. But one thing is for certain, the Void Drinkers did a ton of heavy lifting in this game in particular, drawing so much damage away, almost kind of like baiting Nalguidan to a false sense of security, because he's like, okay, well, these are the big taunts that I have to clear, and I'm good, right? Like, Ticketus is not a taunt minion. I can get past it. Pressure commits almost all this damage down to 6. With the Minari Mashur, comes down and restores his life all the way from single digits back up to almost 20. I mean, that expression, that doom zoom, tells you everything that you need to know, which was Nalguidan. He set it up beautifully and just got swatted down by Fr0zen.